the earth was no longer the domain of the living. Cities that once held millions now lay in ruins, their streets overflowing with the husks of the dead. The last remnants of humanity had gathered in Fort Genesis, the final stronghold standing against extinction. In a dimly lit war room, Commander Elias Graves scanned the holographic battlefield. His grizzled face, lined with scars and exhaustion, was a testament to the years of survival. Around him, the last leaders of the resistance, soldiers, scavengers, and former scientists, awaited his words. "This war has lasted 20 years, Graves growled, gripping the table's edges. "We have one last shot. One final battle. Either we reclaim this planet, or we become its ghosts." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. At his side, Dr. Helena Carter, the lead scientist, pulled up a screen displaying reconnaissance footage. "We have a problem," she said. The footage played, revealing something horrifying, an army of zombies moving in perfect unison. They weren't mindless wanderers. They moved with strategy, purpose, intelligence. The room fell silent. "Impossible," whispered Sergeant Cole Ramirez, shaking his head. "Zombies don't do that." "They can't." "They do now," Dr. Carter countered. "This isn't just a mindless horde. It's an organized one. And leading them is something we've never seen before." The screen zoomed in, revealing a massive, grotesque figure, the warlord. 7 feet tall, his flesh was a horrifying fusion of necrotic rot and something new, something unnatural. His eyes, unlike the vacant stares of the undead, burned with cruel intelligence. In his hand, he wielded a rusted, bloodied blade, a weapon. The implications were terrifying. Zombies didn't use weapons. They didn't plan, coordinate, or lead. But this one did. "He's coming," Graves said darkly. "And when he does, we'll either stand or fall." Meanwhile, the warlord stood atop a collapsed skyscraper, his gaze fixed on the distant lights of Fort Genesis. His rotting lips curled into something resembling a grin. Behind him, tens of thousands of zombies waited in eerie silence. They didn't groan. They didn't shuffle aimlessly. They stood ready. A single, guttural growl escaped his throat. The horde moved as one. The last war had begun. The alarms in Fort Genesis howled like dying screams. Floodlights illuminated the horizon beyond the fortress walls, revealing a sight no one had ever imagined, a zombie army marching in formation. Commander Elias Graves gritted his teeth as he watched through his binoculars. The warlord's forces weren't like the mindless hordes they had fought for decades. These creatures advanced with discipline, forming ranks, their grotesque bodies illuminated by the firelight of the ruined cityscape behind them. "They're not attacking yet," Sergeant Cole Ramirez said, lowering his own binoculars. "They're waiting for something." Graves didn't respond. His mind raced through possible explanations. Was this some sick new evolution of the virus? A mutation that granted intelligence? Or was something, or someone, controlling them? Dr. Helena Carter rushed onto the watchtower, her face pale. "We analyzed the footage," she said, holding up a tablet. "And we found something." She swiped through images of the warlord, zooming in on his grotesque form. But now, something was visible under the layers of rot and battle scars. Metal. Cybernetics. "This thing, it's not just undead," Helena whispered. "It's been engineered." Graves stiffened. "You mean, someone built this thing?" Helena hesitated, then nodded. "And not just built. Commanded. The warlord isn't just leading these zombies, he's controlling them like a hive mind." Cole let out a low curse. "That means, someone out there did this on purpose." Before they could process the horrifying implications, low boom shook the fortress. Then another. Graves turned sharply to the battlefield. A single figure strode forward from the ranks of the undead. The warlord. The fortress gates creaked under their own weight as the soldiers inside braced themselves for the assault. But the warlord did not charge. Instead, he raised his rusted, blood-soaked sword, and plunged it into the ground. The zombies behind him stopped. The silence was deafening. And then, in a deep, guttural voice that should not have been possible, the warlord spoke. "Surrender. Or be erased." Inside Fort Genesis, panic spread like wildfire. Soldiers shouted in disbelief. Civilians clutched their children. The dead had never spoken before. This defied everything they knew. "We don't negotiate with the dead," Ramirez snapped. "Maybe we should listen," Helena countered, voice unsteady. "What if there's more to this?" Before the debate could continue, a second boom sounded. A projectile, a severed head, crashed against the outer walls of the fortress. It belonged to one of their scouts. His face, frozen in horror, was missing an eye. A message was carved into his forehead. "Last warning." Graves exhaled slowly. The warlord had given them a choice. But deep down, he knew the truth. This was no negotiation. This was a declaration. The last war had begun. The walls of Fort Genesis trembled as the eerie silence outside stretched on. The warlord had made his demand: surrender, or be erased. But no one inside the fortress had any intention of giving in. Commander Elias Graves turned to his soldiers, his voice a growl of defiance. "We don't negotiate with the dead. We fight." A roar of approval erupted from the gathered warriors. Sergeant Cole Ramirez gripped his rifle. "Damn right," he muttered. "Let's show these bastards why humanity isn't done yet." Dr. Helena Carter, however, wasn't so sure. She paced beside the war table, her fingers tapping anxiously on the surface. "Something isn't right," she murmured. "Why give us a choice? Why not just attack?" Cole scoffed. "Because they're trying to scare us." Helena shook her head. "No. They're waiting for something." And she was right. Midnight, the saboteurs strike. While the soldiers prepared for battle, a small group of figures moved through the lower levels of Fort Genesis. Clad in ragged clothes, they navigated the abandoned tunnels beneath the fortress, moving with urgency. At their head was Leon Voss, a former scientist who had once worked alongside Helena. His eyes burned with conviction as he led his team through the old maintenance corridors. "This war is already over," he whispered. "Humanity's done. But if we join them, if we accept evolution, we can survive." One of his followers, Jonah Price, hesitated. "Leon, this is crazy. You really think they'll accept us?" Leon smirked. "They already have." He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a grotesque mutation spreading across his arm, blackened veins, shifting under his skin. It was the same disease that had destroyed the world. But unlike the others who had turned mindless, Leon was still in control. "We aren't dying," Leon said. "We're changing." Jonah recoiled. "You're infected?" Leon grabbed him by the collar. "I'm chosen." Then he drove a knife into Jonah's stomach. The others watched in stunned silence as Jonah collapsed, choking on his own blood. Leon exhaled and turned back to their mission. "Open the gates," he ordered. And with that, humanity's greatest enemy was no longer just the undead. The gates fall. At the top of the watchtower, Graves scanned the battlefield. The warlord still stood motionless, his horde silent, waiting. Why weren't they attacking? Then, beep, beep, beep. A red warning flashed on the console beside him. The outer gates were unlocking. Graves' blood ran cold. "Who's at the controls?" he barked. A horrified technician scrambled to respond. I don't know. Someone hacked the system." Cole's radio crackled. "Commander, we have a breach in the lower sectors, someone's inside the control room." Graves didn't hesitate. "Lock down all exits, now!" But it was too late. A low, metallic groan echoed through the air as the fortress gates swung open. And outside, the warlord smiled. The horde surges. The silence shattered. With an earth-shaking roar, the undead charged. Tens of thousands of zombies flooded toward the open gates, their movements no longer slow and clumsy. They sprinted, their eyes gleaming with hunger and malice. Gunfire erupted from the walls as soldiers scrambled to contain the breach. Explosions rocked the battlefield as grenades and artillery rounds tore into the horde. But it wasn't enough. Graves rushed down the stairs, his rifle in hand. He knew they'd been betrayed, but by who? Inside the fortress, chaos reigned. Zombies were already pouring into the lower sectors, tearing through civilians and soldiers alike. Screams of terror filled the air. Dr. Helena Carter barricaded herself inside the lab, her mind racing. If the warlord was controlling them, then there had to be a way to disrupt the link. She just needed more time. But time was running out. As the undead flooded the fortress, Leon Voss watched from the shadows, his corrupted arm pulsating. He had chosen his side. Humanity's last stronghold was falling. And the war was only beginning. The fortress of Fort Genesis, the last stronghold of humanity, was no longer a sanctuary. It was a war zone. The gates had been breached. The undead swarmed in like a tidal wave, their shrieks echoing through the steel corridors as they ripped into soldiers and civilians alike. The air was thick with gunfire, smoke, and the scent of blood. Commander Elias Graves sprinted through the chaos, his assault rifle rattling as he cut down the nearest zombies. Fort Genesis was falling, fast. If they didn't act now, everything was lost. The fall of the outer defenses. On the fortress walls, Sergeant Cole Ramirez was running out of options. His men were dropping like flies, overwhelmed by the sheer numbers of the horde. He slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle and emptied it into the nearest pack of sprinting undead. "We can't hold this position," a soldier screamed beside him before a zombie tackled him, teeth sinking into his throat. Cole gritted his teeth. "Pull back to the second perimeter. Fall back." But as they retreated, he saw the warlord. The massive, grotesque figure strode through the battlefield with unnatural grace, his rotting flesh reinforced with cybernetic enhancements. His burning red eyes locked onto Cole. The warlord raised his sword, then pointed it toward the fortress. The horde moved as one. Cole barely had time to react before an explosion rocked the battlefield. The east wall collapsed. Zombies poured through the rubble like locusts. "Shit! The walls are down!" Cole shouted into his radio. "They're inside! They're inside!" Leon Voss reveals himself. Deep inside the stronghold, Dr. Helena Carter barricaded herself inside the research lab, furiously typing on a console. She had found something. "The warlord isn't just leading them," she muttered. "He's controlling them. If we can break his link, we might have a chance." The doors to the lab suddenly slammed open. Helena whirled around, only to see Leon Voss standing in the doorway. His infected arm pulsed with black veins, his expression twisted into a look of both triumph and pity. "You don't have to fight this," Leon said softly. "This is the future, Helena. We're evolving." Helena's blood turned to ice. "You did this," she whispered. Leon nodded. "Humanity is doomed, Helena. But we can survive, by becoming more. The warlord is proof of that." And now, he stepped closer. "You will be too." Helena grabbed a scalpel from the table and pointed it at him. "You're insane." Leon lunged. "The evacuation begins." Commander Graves was bleeding from a gash in his side, but he kept fighting. The fortress was lost, but not everyone had to die here. "We're getting as many people out as we can," he shouted into his radio. "Everyone fall back to the escape tunnels, now." Across the stronghold, the remnants of humanity fought tooth and nail, covering the retreat of women, children, and the wounded. But time was against them. The warlord strode into the fortress, his sword dripping with blood. He watched the fleeing humans with something almost resembling amusement. They were rats, scurrying for survival. He would crush them soon enough. But then, a single gunshot rang out. The warlord staggered. Cole Ramirez stood at the top of a broken staircase, sniper rifle in hand. Smoke curled from the barrel. The bullet had punched through the warlord's eye. But the warlord did not fall. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward Cole, and smiled. Cole's stomach dropped. Oh, hell! The warlord charged. The beginning of the end. The last remnants of Fort Genesis fled into the underground tunnels as the fortress collapsed around them. Dr. Helena Carter, wounded but alive, escaped Leon's grasp at the last moment. She knew the truth now: the warlord's control could be broken. But now, humanity was homeless. As the survivors emerged into the wasteland beyond, they looked back at the burning ruins of Fort Genesis. The last city of mankind was gone. But the war was far from over. The survivors would fight again. Because if they didn't, Earth would belong to the dead. The survivors of Fort Genesis had escaped, barely. But as they emerged from the underground tunnels, they were greeted by a world that no longer belonged to them. The sky was an ashen gray, thick with smoke from burning cities. The air carried the distant echoes of the undead horde, still marching under their warlord's command. The fortress had fallen, but the war wasn't over. Commander Elias Graves turned to what was left of his people: soldiers, scientists, civilians, all shaken but still standing. "This isn't the end," Graves said, his voice rough but firm. "We lost Fort Genesis. But if we take out the warlord, we take away their leader. We end this war." The survivors exchanged wary glances. They had seen the warlord's power. He wasn't just another zombie, he was something more. Something unstoppable. But Graves wasn't asking for permission. He was giving them a mission. "We hunt him down," he continued. "And we kill him." A dangerous plan. They couldn't just charge into the undead army. They needed an edge. Dr. Helena Carter had one. "I found something back in the lab," she explained as the group gathered around a makeshift war table in the ruins of an old gas station. "The warlord isn't just leading them, he's controlling them. His body is enhanced, yes, but it's more than that. He's emitting a signal." Cole Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "Like a damn radio tower?" "Exactly," Helena confirmed. "If we can jam that signal, we might be able to shut him down, or at least weaken him." Graves nodded. "So how do we do it?" Helena hesitated. "That's the problem. We need an EMP powerful enough to disrupt whatever's keeping him functional." Cole scoffed. "Yeah, because we just have one of those lying around." Helena exhaled. "No, but there's something close. There's an old military bunker about 50 miles from here. If the stockpile inside is still intact, we might find an electromagnetic warhead." Graves smirked. "Then that's our next stop." But reaching the bunker meant traveling straight through enemy territory. The warlord's army was everywhere. And Leon Voss, the traitor who had helped open Fort Genesis's gates, was still out there. Watching. Waiting. The journey through hell. The survivors moved under the cover of night, sticking to the ruins of abandoned highways and collapsed buildings. But the undead were evolving. Scouting ahead, Cole spotted zombie patrols, groups of undead moving in coordinated search patterns. The warlord's influence had turned them into something more than just flesh-hungry monsters. "They're looking for us," he whispered into his radio. Graves' response was grim. "Then we stay off their radar." The group avoided detection as long as they could, but on the third night, disaster struck. A child tripped over loose rubble. The sound echoed. A scout zombie's head snapped toward them. Then it let out a screech. Within seconds, the night erupted with the thunder of thousands of feet. "The horde," someone screamed. Graves barked orders. "Scatter. Regroup at the bunker." The survivors ran for their lives as the undead poured into the ruins, chasing them down with terrifying speed. Cole Ramirez stayed behind to cover the retreat. Sniper rifle in hand, he picked off the fastest zombies, dropping them one by one, until he ran out of bullets. Then he ran. But he wasn't fast enough. As he rounded a corner, something tackled him from behind, slamming him into the ground. His vision blurred as a figure loomed over him. Not a zombie. Leon Voss. "Hello, old friend," Leon sneered. His infected arm pulsated with dark veins, glowing faintly in the moonlight. "We need to talk." The warlord's warning. By dawn, the remaining survivors reached the bunker. But they weren't alone. As Graves and Helena caught their breath, they heard a voice echo across the wasteland, deep, distorted, and impossibly loud. It came from the warlord. "You cannot run forever." The survivors froze as the undead general stepped into view, standing on a nearby ridge. "Your species is at its end. Accept your place, or be erased." Then, without another word, he turned and vanished into the fog. It wasn't an attack. It was a warning. Graves clenched his fists. "We're coming for you, bastard." But what he didn't know, Leon Voss had already made his move. And Cole Ramirez was now his prisoner. Cole Ramirez was no stranger to pain. He had been wounded before, survived countless battles, but this was different. His head throbbed as he came to, his arms shackled to the rusted frame of a collapsed building. The air was thick with the stench of decay. He could hear the distant moans of the undead, but they weren't attacking. Because they weren't just mindless monsters anymore. They were waiting. Across from him, standing with an air of twisted confidence, was Leon Voss. "About time you woke up," Leon said, his infected arm pulsating with sickly dark veins. Cole gritted his teeth. "Still running errands for your corpse king?" Leon smirked. "I told you, Cole. This isn't a war. It's an evolution. And you're on the wrong side of it." Cole tugged at the shackles. "Let me guess. You're here to turn me into one of your freaks?" Leon knelt beside him, his corrupted hand reaching out. "I'm here to save you. The warlord is building something new, something better. The strong will inherit this world, and you, my friend, are strong. You don't have to die." Cole spat at his feet. "Not interested." Leon sighed. "I figured you'd say that." Then he stepped back and let the zombies close in. The assault on the outpost. Back at the military bunker, Graves and Helena were preparing for war. The EMP warhead they had come for was still intact, buried deep within the underground vaults of the bunker. It was their only shot at taking down the warlord. But before they could launch their attack, they had to get Cole back. A scout had tracked his captors to an abandoned outpost, an old industrial plant, swarming with zombies and Leon's infected followers. Graves checked his weapon. "We go in fast, get Cole, and get out." Helena grabbed his arm. "And what if it's a trap?" Graves' eyes were cold. "It's always a trap. The battle begins." The team moved in under the cover of darkness, silent as shadows. But the moment they breached the perimeter, all hell broke loose. Alarms blared. Floodlights snapped on. The undead poured from the shadows, their glowing eyes locking onto the intruders. Graves fired first, his rifle barking as he cut down the first wave. "Get to Cole. I'll hold them off." Helena and a small strike team pushed forward, blasting their way through the swarm. Inside the main building, Cole was still chained when the first explosion rocked the facility. Leon turned sharply, his smirk vanishing. Cole grinned. "Looks like my ride's here." Leon clenched his fists. "You're making a mistake, Cole. You could have been something greater." Cole narrowed his eyes. "I already am." Then, with every ounce of strength he had left, he kicked Leon straight in the chest, sending him staggering back. Before Leon could recover, Helena burst into the room. "Get down!" Cole ducked. A second later, a grenade rolled into the room. Boom! The explosion blew the doors apart. Helena rushed forward, cutting Cole's restraints. "Can you walk?" Cole groaned. "I can shoot." "Good enough." The two sprinted toward the exit as the entire outpost erupted in chaos. Leon's final warning. As they neared the escape route, Leon Voss emerged from the smoke. But this time, he wasn't alone. The warlord was with him. The towering, cybernetic undead stepped forward, his presence suffocating. His glowing red eyes locked onto Graves and Helena. Then he spoke. "You delay the inevitable." Graves raised his rifle. "So come and kill us." The warlord didn't attack. Instead, he grinned. "I don't need to." And then, he turned and walked away. Leon followed, but not before glancing back at Cole one last time. "You think you won something today?" he called out. "You haven't even seen what's coming." And with that, they were gone. The countdown to the final battle. Back at the bunker, the survivors regrouped. They had Cole back. They had the EMP warhead. But something about the warlord's retreat didn't sit right. Helena spoke the fear they all felt. "He let us escape." Graves exhaled. "Yeah. Because he doesn't need to chase us." Cole finished the thought. "Because he knows we're coming." The final battle was set. And the fate of the Earth would be decided. The war had come down to this, one final stand. The survivors of Fort Genesis had nothing left to lose. Their homes were gone, their numbers were dwindling, and the world itself had already fallen to the dead. But if they succeeded today, if they killed the warlord, there was still a chance. A chance to reclaim what little remained of Earth. A chance to end the nightmare. The plan. They had one weapon that could turn the tide, the EMP warhead. If detonated close enough, it would sever the warlord's control over the undead, leaving his horde in chaos. Without his leadership, the zombies would turn into nothing more than mindless beasts. But there was a problem. The warlord knew they were coming. And he was waiting for them. His army had gathered at the ruins of New Washington, the largest remaining zombie stronghold. The city was a maze of collapsed skyscrapers, overrun highways, and nests of the undead. It was his throne. To win, the survivors had to fight their way through the city, get the warhead inside, and detonate it near the warlord. And that meant going through hell. The battle begins. At dawn, they moved in. Cole Ramirez led the first assault team, carving a path through the zombie-infested streets with sniper fire and explosives. Helena Carter was with the strike team, carrying the warhead in an armored transport. Graves commanded the main force, keeping the undead horde occupied. The moment they entered the city, the warlord's trap was sprung. Explosions ripped through the streets as zombie berserkers, faster, stronger, more vicious than anything they had faced, descended from the buildings. Gunfire filled the air. The screams of the dying were drowned out by the endless roar of the undead. "Keep pushing!" Graves roared, unloading a full magazine into an approaching horde. "We have to get to the center." The battle raged for hours. The transport carrying the EMP warhead was hit. The vehicle flipped, skidding across the cracked pavement. Helena barely managed to crawl out before a cyber-enhanced zombie lunged at her. But Cole was there. One clean shot. Right between the eyes. "We're not dying here," Cole growled, pulling her to her feet. "Let's move." Through sheer determination and overwhelming firepower, the survivors fought their way forward, inch by bloody inch. But then, the warlord arrived. The monster unleashed. He emerged from the ruins, towering over the battlefield. His cybernetic enhancements gleamed in the firelight, his burning red eyes locked onto Graves. In one hand, he held a massive blade, dripping with fresh blood. In the other, he held Leon Voss. The traitor's body was limp, his infected arm completely blackened. The warlord tossed Leon aside like a broken toy. "He failed me," the warlord's voice boomed. You will suffer the same fate. Then, he charged. Graves met him head-on. Bullets did nothing. Explosions barely slowed him. The warlord was unstoppable. Until Helena made her move. She had one last trick left. She dragged the EMP warhead as close as she could, sprinting across the battlefield while dodging incoming attacks. With the last of her strength, she armed the device and shouted, "Now!" Graves and Cole threw everything they had at the warlord, keeping him distracted just long enough for the EMP countdown to hit 0. Boom! A massive shockwave ripped through the battlefield. The effect was instant. The warlord staggered. His body convulsed as the electromagnetic pulse fried his cybernetic enhancements. The undead army froze. Then, they turned on each other. Without the warlord's control, the horde collapsed into chaos. The battlefield became a bloodbath as zombies tore each other apart, their link to their master severed. And the warlord himself was vulnerable. The kill shot. Graves didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fallen anti-tank rifle, aimed it right at the warlord's head, and pulled the trigger. The shot tore through his skull. The warlord fell. For the first time since the outbreak, the battlefield fell silent. The aftermath. The war was over. With the warlord dead, the last organized zombie force crumbled. The remaining undead became mindless once more, easier to eliminate. The survivors had won. But at a heavy cost. Most of their fighters were gone. Their cities were still ruins. And the world was still crawling with millions of zombies. But for the first time in years, there was hope. Cole and Helena stood side by side, watching as the sun rose over the battlefield. "What now?" Helena asked. Cole exhaled. "We rebuild." Graves walked over, wiping blood from his face. "And we fight. Until every last one of those things is gone." The war wasn't truly over. But humanity had a future again. And that was enough. The end.